My name's Frank Buzzard. At the time of the Columbia accident, I was the Senior Integration Manager at NASA headquarters for the International Space Station. I had previously been the Space Shuttle Chief Engineer. I went to headquarters for about 9 months when Mr. Sean O'Keefe came in as our new NASA administrator. We brought in Major General Mike Kostelnik. He was the program director for both the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station. So my role was the Senior System Integration Manager for Kostelnik at NASA headquarters for the International Space Station. Parker Counts was my counterpart for the Space Shuttle program. So I actually came home on Friday before we lost Columbia. In February, we had a big retirement party at the Johnson Space Center. All my family was there. In fact, Mike Kostelnik came in and presented me with the Distinguished Service Medal and a lot of NASA friends. And so the next morning, Saturday morning, was a big emotional high, having a retirement party. The next morning, someone called me from JSC and said, "Turn your television on." I turned it on, and of course, there were pictures of Columbia breaking up over Texas. And so it was just a tremendous change in emotions from the previous day, from an emotional high of finishing your career and then watching Columbia break up over Texas. So I struggled over the weekend with what I should do. Should I go in on Monday and sign the retirement papers? It took a while, a couple of days for NASA to get organized, but I decided not to go in and sign the papers on Monday. My son Patrick was in from Moscow. He was working for NASA as the ISS lead in Moscow, and he had come home for the retirement party. And he told me, "Dad, they're going to need you, so just report for duty." So I did that. On Tuesday, Mike Kostelnik called me and asked me if I could serve as the Columbia Taskforce director, and I told him I could do that, and I'd be very willing to do that. Mike Kostelnik faxed me the contingency plan from NASA headquarters. I was able to look at it. I'm thankful that we had one. It established the foundation of an accident investigation board, had some of the key members that later became the Columbia Accident Investigation Board already identified. So they began to put that plan in action immediately. So it at least gave you a starting point. For my function, which was a Columbia Task Force director, it just said we need a task force director. It didn't have any details about what functions the task force would perform, but it did note that it would be the primary interface between the Accident Investigation Board, and they were to execute the NASA part of any request for analysis, information, any type of engineering studies, background information for the board, and we would be the daily NASA interface with the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. So one of my first lessons learned is that in the contingency plan for any future contingency, it would be very helpful to write down what are the critical functions that any task force and his director and his team, what are the functions that they will need to do to interface with a formal accident investigation board. And I wrote down what I believe are the critical functions, and my recommendation is you would add those to the contingency plan. The first thing I would write down is that you're going to need a very strong configuration management role. I picked Pat Piola for my configuration management. He had strong experience in that area. I'd worked with Pat for some significant number of years. So I would write down configuration management, one of your very first and important primary roles. The second one is you'll need legal representation. The accident board will call witnesses. You'll need strong legal representation. Donna Schaefer did that for me. She did an outstanding job. JSC Legal provided Donna to our team. She was able to brief witnesses on their roles and responsibilities, what their rights are. All of the critical players that were interviewed by the Accident Investigation Board, who were part of the decision making of the Columbia flight, were formal witnesses and formally interviewed. Third thing that I did is I knew I would need an information technology representative or a small team. So I got an IT team. Lynn Vernon from JSC led that for me. I had to have an administrative support at each of the major centers because I knew that Kennedy Space Center would be involved, Marshall Space Flight Center, Johnson Space Flight Center, the Stennis Space Flight Center. So the 4 major human space flight centers were clearly going to be involved in this investigation. And I knew that the accident investigation team would be going to each of these sites and locations. So the Columbia Accident Investigation Board broke into several teams. So what we wanted to do was I wanted to have an engineering leader or an ops leader because they had an operations team. They had a pre-flight and program management team, and they had a post-accident investigation team. So I wanted to align our organization with the teams that they broke up. So the leader of the task force has to be cognizant of and with them on a daily basis so that when they determine the roles and responsibilities of each of their separate teams, then what I did was looked at their roles and responsibilities, and I picked a team leader for each of the teams that the Accident Investigation Board set up. Now, it evolved slightly as the investigation went on, and I was able to adjust and add appropriate team members as it went on. But the key lesson learned is that since you're the primary interface with the Accident Investigation Board, you need a strong leader and a reasonably sized support team for each of the Accident Investigation Board's sub-teams. My startup transients, my advice to anybody who does this in terms of a lesson learned is expect there to be startup transients. Every accident investigation is different. Every accident investigation board, its leadership, its roles and responsibilities will be different. So you can write down the principal functions that we talked about as functions that you will need, but then you need to work with them on a daily basis. Be flexible, expect your organization to change. As the Accident Investigation Board changes their roles and responsibilities, be ready to change with it, add and subtract from your team with strong people that can support them. It will likely take 3 to 4 weeks for the Accident Investigation Board to begin to have a better idea of what are the primary roles and responsibilities, what sub-teams do they need. So you need to be flexible. You need to expect there to be startup transients. And we were able to do that. And the primary reason we were able to do it is that I spent every day with the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. So I was quite aware of when they needed to move to a different organizational structure or different focus or need specific tasks done. I was able to adjust our organization. In terms of how I was able to adjust the task force, and the important thing is right away I was given carte blanche by each of the major center directors, Kennedy, Marshall, Stennis, Johnson Space Center. Very early in the process, in fact, on day 2, I think, after I wrote down the functions that I needed, I met with each of the center directors, some of them personally, some of them by telecon. They pledged and promised their full support. They executed it with their full support. So I would expect NASA to do that to any future director. But the lesson learned is the task force director has to contact them, say, I need these functions, I need your best people, I need your commitment to support these teams. And if we have to adjust because the Accident Investigation Board is adjusting, I'll need your support to change the task force organizational structure or its personnel. They were completely supportive. That made my job so much easier. One of the primary responsibilities of the Columbia Task Force, I knew, would be to educate the CAIB, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board members, their primary members, and their support staff on Shuttle 101, the basic operation and management of the shuttle system. All of them had great credentials for previous accident investigations. They came from major industries and from the military, where safety and accident investigation was a primary role. But the key thing and the key lesson learned is recognize they will not have detailed knowledge of shuttle operations, its configuration, its engineering design, some of the early engineering design trades and how we got to the final configuration, how we operated, how we did the program management, how the principal centers would interact. So recognize that this task force for any major investigation of a NASA incident will have to educate the boards. That will take several months. It will be one of your primary and early responsibilities. The primary requirement for a task force director is they have had nothing to do with the accident itself, either in operations or management, and they must be independent and they must be outside. So those are two very critical roles of the task force director. The reason is that our own human biases get in the way. An example is for the shuttle team, their bias was that the foam could not have caused the problem. So they were constantly looking for what else might it have been. Could it have been a micrometeoroid? Could it have been a seal that was bad on a landing gear door? And they will have their biases that will be different than the Accident Investigation Board. And it's difficult for them to look past those biases and to do what the board would like it to do. And I'll give you an example that happened to us. The board initially did much like NASA and looked for other possible causes and set up teams. One of them was a penetration of the main landing gear door. We always thought that that might be true. Few people thought that a piece of foam from the external tank could actually break something unless it hit a critical area and knocked a tile off something like the landing gear door. As the debris field, that's another important lesson learned, is you need to gather debris. What is the accident? What's the hardware telling you? We put that together at the Kennedy Space Center, and within a month or two, it became apparent that this event started in the left wing, and we were able to tell that because of the missing pieces that were not recovered, and they concentrated on panel 8 of the left wing RCC, reinforced carbon-carbon panels. It was missing. We never recovered any pieces. We never recovered, or very little, of 7 and panels 9. And anything behind them, we didn't recover any significant pieces. So the Accident Investigation Board homed in on the RCC panel. We had video that said something struck the left wing. We weren't sure where it was, but a big piece of foam struck it. So the investigation board decided a reasonable path to pursue was to do testing of foam hitting the leading edge panels, the RCC panels. We went to the shuttle program. Scott Hubbard was the leader of this activity, and we asked them for flight hardware, I've forgotten the word where you have simulated hardware, but it may not be exactly flight configuration or the materials used for flight configuration. We wanted flight hardware. We went to Southwest Research. We put together a test plan that would shoot foam at the actual leading edge at different speeds and angles and see if we could reproduce some type of damage to the RCC panels that would tell us that this could be the initiating event. My point is that the biases of the shuttle program, both management and engineering team, was foam could not hurt the RCC. It had to be something else. They resisted giving us those panels, so we had a face-to-face meeting with principally Ralph Rowe and Ron Dittemore that said the board needs flight hardware for panels 8, 7, and 9. We will have to put together a test program. We need that hardware, and they resisted it, but I was able to go to NASA management. One, I understood what the board was trying to do. I felt it was valid. I went to Admiral Gehman, asked me if he thought that was a valid test. I said, yes, I felt it was, and you have a reason to do it. And we went to NASA management, not around behind Dittemore or Rowe, but we were able to convince them that that's what the board needed. We needed that hardware, and they provided it to us. So the lesson learned is expect a human bias. It may not be where the board's going. Expect resistance from the program, and be able to work on both sides truthfully, honestly, use logic and reason, explain what the board wants, why they want it. And if you aren't able to get it, then you have to go to senior management and say, the board is the final determination. We need the hardware. It was provided, and they did so. First thing I would say about Admiral Harold Gehman was he was a gifted leader, highly intelligent, and he was, as an organizational leader, I learned a lot from him just watching him and interfacing with him on a daily basis. Any major board like this is going to have a large number of different personalities. They will have a lot of things to do. He was very adept at what I would call herding cats. There were a lot of personalities on the accident investigation board that would go in different directions for their own reasons, like cats are. And Hal Gehman was extremely capable and able to keep the board focused, move it forward when it needed to move forward, reorganize it when it needed to be reorganized. So I have great admiration and respect for Hal Gehman. He was a wonderful choice to do that job. Second thing I would say is the task force director and the leader of the investigation board and their principal members, you have to establish a trust relationship with them. They have to view you as a task force. NASA, initially they'll say, oh, he's part of NASA. How can he help me? He'll be biased like NASA is biased. So you really have to have as one of your fundamental roles, not to pick sides, and to be in a position to help the accident investigation board and to be their advocate before NASA for the what and why of what they've asked to do. That's extremely important. Early on, I developed a very positive and trusting relationship with Hal Gehman. I felt like I could go to him at any time with any problem I had. For example, the overwhelming request for data early in the process. I went to him and suggested a solution of this investigation form that we talked about. He was very understood it immediately and implemented it exactly. Another example is I went to him and asked for some help with too many requests and too much detail, and honestly too much micromanagement of the teams. At one example, Kennedy Space Center, I gave him the what and the why it was a problem, and asked for his help. He immediately resolved it, and those team members that were doing that still became productive Columbia Accident Investigation Board team members because Hal Gehman counseled them. They were able to hear and understand my part of the problem, and he was able to fix that. So he was a wonderful leader. I learned a lot from him. It was an honor and privilege to work with him. My primary reporting was to General Mike Kostelnik. He was the program director for both shuttle and for space station. So he is the one who assigned the Columbia Task Force director. And even though organizationally that has changed, Bill Gerstenmaier is that person in charge of shuttle and for all human spaceflight. That should be the primary reporting avenue for any future task force director that NASA selects and interfaces with any future accident investigation board. I believe that's the proper role. I didn't have a lot of daily contact with Mike Kostelnik. What I did was put in place an administrative and an engineering leader at each of the centers. One of those was NASA headquarters. That communication and engineering leader was Mike Hawes, very familiar with both shuttle and space station as I was. So he was an excellent choice to do that. And Mike provided a daily interface with either General Mike Kostelnik, who was an assistant or was an associate administrator. Bill Reedy was the actual administrator for human spaceflight at that time, and I didn't have any significant contact with Bill Reedy because Mike Hawes and Mike Kostelnik would do that. There were several times that I communicated with Mike Kostelnik at critical parts of the investigation to make sure that he was informed of a perhaps contentious decision. The RCC panel, the discussion with the shuttle program was one that I did have that discussion with Mike Kostelnik. I didn't want him to be surprised. I wanted him to hear from me the what and the why they were asking for that type of analysis and the resistance from the shuttle program. So you have to pick and choose. You want to make sure your direct report is not surprised by anything, but you can have, I had a daily 30-minute to 45-minute communications with all of the 4 primary centers and NASA headquarters, where we would discuss what are the critical items today, what are the board's focus, what's the status of any analysis or future meetings that's in progress, what are the critical items. And so that communication link with Mike Hawes allowed me to go do my job on a daily basis, and I didn't have to spend a lot of time contacting Mike Kostelnik or Bill Reedy. Mike Hawes did that for me. So I think that functioned well, and it also had our team organized on what our priorities were for the day. One of the critical management positions of the task force is to have a strong deputy. And I knew right away that I needed to evaluate my strengths and my weaknesses and pick somebody who would augment my weaknesses. I felt like my strengths were, one, knowledge of the shuttle system from an engineering point of view. I had excellent multi-center integration skills. I had a strong background in program management, but I did not have a strong background on shuttle operations. So right away, I homed in on, for my deputy, I need a flight director. They are part of I knew this investigation would involve decision-making during the launch event, on-orbit operations, what we might do. So it was a no-brainer for me to pick a flight director. Jeff Howell was our center director at the time, and he allowed me to have whoever I needed, and there was never a question about that. And so I interviewed several flight directors. I quickly picked John Shannon. He had excellent communication skills, strong engineering background, and even stronger operations background, and the knowledge of critical decision making in real time during a mission. So I augmented my weaknesses with a strength, and we had similar skills in communications and organizational planning, so they fit together very well. The lesson learned is you need a strong deputy. Pick one that has good communication, organizational skills, and one who fills the knowledge base that you don't have and augments the strengths that you do have. about 2/3 of the way through the investigation, I believe it was General Hess came to me, and he asked me if NASA knew that there was a hole in the wing, in the leading edge, is there anything you could do to have rescued that crew? And they explained why they felt like that was important for us to evaluate, why it was important to their accident investigation, and would be important to the decision making that went through that. So I realized right away that John Shannon would be the right person to lead that, because it would be led by a flight director in any future case, because they're the ones that have all of the support team. They are trained and picked to do that type of stuff. So John did an outstanding job on that. He put that together in about 3 weeks, and we learned that we did have another shuttle. You would have to know very early in the process, within day 1, 2, or 3, that you did have a hole in the wing and a problem. You would have to power down the shuttle and save its consumables, extend its time on orbit, and then you would have to have someone, this would be all the way at the NASA administrator level at least, and maybe higher than that, that would say, we had a serious problem on the previous launch. If we have a vehicle that could go rescue them, we would have to shorten the processing time to get it ready. That's a risk. And then we would have to take the risk of this rescue crew having the same problem and then losing 2 crews, even if we were able to go up and put together a plan to rescue them. Very difficult decision. Not clear that you could or would make that, but that was not the point of the exercise. But John Shannon did an outstanding job putting that together. I commend him for it, and it just shows the wisdom of having the operational background as part of your team for any future incident that involves human spaceflight. Will very likely involve an ops team, and so pick your deputy that can help you with those things if you're not one of those flight directors. Initially, the Accident Investigation Board and NASA concentrated on other possibilities of, for example, the main landing gear door was always a high suspect for us. If we knocked off a critical piece of tile or its seal failed, we knew that we could get hot gas in there and perhaps burn off the wing. So I think many of us in NASA had a bias that it's hard to imagine that a piece of foam striking the wing could actually punch a hole in the leading edge of the wing. I believe that was my biggest surprise. It did not surprise me, but I guess I learned as the process went on that you have to be flexible. This whole system is going to change. Its direction will change. I talked earlier about, as we put together the pieces that we found, it kept pointing to the left wing and the RCC, and we should put together a program to go test that. There was no test data of foam hitting an RCC, and is it possible for it to actually punch a hole in the wing? And then the other surprise for me is I was at Southwest Research when they did that test, and when the last test at about 500 miles an hour, which we were able to do a back of the envelope analysis, and this piece of foam was slowing down as shuttle was accelerating toward it. It hit the wing at about 500 miles per hour relative impact speed. And when the dust cleared, and there was that giant hole in the RCC, you could hear an audible gasp from the entire group. There must have been 50 to 100 people executing and watching that test. Went, and this intake of breath. So it wasn't just me that was surprised by the ability to punch a hole in that wing by a piece of lightweight foam. The task force has to be one staffed with really your best people. This cannot be an afterthought. This has too high visibility. The implications are too big, and NASA recognized that, and I believe they provided the best and the brightest. And so that's one lesson learned. Second one is you need to be flexible. Any major investigation like this is going to twist and turn as you learn more and you have more information. It's going to move around. Move with it. The other thing that I think is important for the task force is be honest and open. don't put yourself either as a director or any of your people in a position of us versus them. The investigation board or your support people, or NASA versus the investigation board. You have to project, you have to believe that you're really working together to try to solve this problem. It is not the board against NASA or vice versa. I think those are the critical things that I learned. Open and honest communication, both with the board, with your team members. There were only one thing that I didn't discuss openly with my team members, and that was the human remains discussion. I had knowledge of that, so you can't do that. But everything else, you are more effective as a task force if everything that I knew, they knew, and the reason why I was directing certain things, sharing that with them openly on the daily basis made us function, I think, very effectively. I guess my key takeaway personally was this was something that was really important. And so I was willing to delay my retirement, and it was the right thing to do. The other thing I would say is that perhaps it was my destiny. This was what I was trained, I was able, and this moment was meant for me.